Is Israel fighting the Psalm 83 war right now? I don't want to say that they are, but I'm asking the question, are they? I'm curious. I'm looking at something that I really haven't heard anyone else talking about as an aspect to the Psalm 83 war and what Israel has been doing. And I'm exploring it, and I would encourage you to explore it as well. So I'm not definitively saying that the Psalm 83 war is happening right now. I am not putting a biblical prophecy into the headlines. I want to be cautious of doing that because a lot of guys do that kind of stuff, and it turns out that it wasn't, and they were wrong, and I just don't want to be one of those guys. At the same time, I think that we need to take a critical biblical look at what is prophesied and see if this is happening. And so a lot of this will remain to be seen in the future. We just don't know right now, but I'm going to show you something interesting that, again, I haven't heard anyone else talking about it, and I've been thinking about it for a few months now. So what is the Psalm 83 war? Let me give you a brief breakdown of the Psalm 83 war. I encourage you to read Psalm 83 for yourself, because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to pull out a couple key points from it. What is it? It's a psalm of Asaph, and Asaph wrote several psalms, and in this particular one, he is calling for God's judgment and the hand of God down upon his enemies, the enemies of Israel, because he has seen that all of these enemies surrounding the nation of Israel have formed a confederacy with each other. So they're all on the same plan. They have formed a conspiracy, and they have conspired together to cut Israel off from being a nation forever. So they want to wipe out all of the Israelites. They all surround Israel. I'm not going to get into the names of them, but they are the ancient names: Philistia, Moab, Assyria. So, Assyria being Iraq/Syria, Tyre being in Lebanon, Philistia being Gaza. Okay, some of the names, and you see some of those same players in action today against the nation of Israel. Interesting. Something else interesting about this is that the names mentioned here in this passage have never all at once been in a war against Israel in the past. You can look through history, and it's actually never happened. So it is thought that this thing is prophetic, and that this will be a war that happens at some point in the future. So the psalmist asked God to intervene on their behalf and to deal with them, to deal with the enemies against Israel, as God dealt with the enemies that Israel faced when they dealt with the Midianites. What is that? Well, recall to yourself the battle that Gideon fought against the Midianites. Okay, you might remember from Sunday school, or maybe you've read it in recent past, that the Midianites were oppressing the Israelis. And Gideon found himself on the threshing floor. He was threshing wheat in private. He was secluded to actually, produce food for his family, because the Midianites would come down and perform these raids and steal and take everything and kill everybody. Anyways, God raises up Gideon. Gideon and 300 Israelites take on the entire Midianite army and kill them all, and then proceed to chase down their leaders and assassinate all of them. So he's saying, Asaph says, deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin. Make their nobles like Oreb, like Zeb. Yes, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. So what were the enemies wanting to do? They wanted to take the pastures of God for their possession. They wanted to take the nation of Israel. And they said, let us cut the name let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. That's in verse 4. So their whole goal and their whole intent is to wipe out Israel and cut them off from being a nation and take the holy pastures of God. Now, you see this now, okay? This is an aspect that you definitely see now. And there's another aspect that I'm going to mention that you see now, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. If you can, please like this video or share it with somebody that needs to hear it or wants to hear it. Help this channel grow. I appreciate it. It's interesting, and it may be a little bit confusing to you to read what he says here, starting in about verse 9 through 12, where he says, deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin, because they're not ordinary names, and you've got to do some digging and some research. So if you do your research, you go back to about Judges 4 through Judges 10, and you start reading, and you will see all these guys mentioned that are mentioned here in Psalm 83, these individual names. And who were they? These were the leaders of the Midianite army. These were commanders / kings. You know, a king back then may have only been a king over a few thousand people. A general maybe over 1,000. You know, I'm not completely certain about how many they commanded, but they're much smaller than today when you think about the king of a nation and how many he commands. But these guys are the heavy-hitting players back in that day. And what happens is these guys were individually hunted down and assassinated. Sisera, I'll just talk about Sisera. What happened to Sisera? Sisera flees the army of the Israelites, and he comes up to this girl, this Hebrew girl named Jael. And Jael lures him into her tent to take a nap and have a drink. And this woman covers him up with a blanket and tucks him in sweetly at night. And he says, can you stand watch outside the tent, make sure nobody comes up on us? And she does all that. And then she proceeds to walk into the tent after he's fast asleep. And she puts a tent peg to the temple of his head and drives it in with a hammer until the tent peg touches dirt. Okay? Brutal assassination. Absolutely magnificent assassination. And, you know, that's just one of these guys. And that's just one thing that happened to him. Well, what have we seen now? What we've got presently, starting October 7th of 2023, Hamas launched an attack against the nation of Israel and hauled hundreds of captives back to the Gaza Strip. They raped, murdered, pillaged, burned, brutally executed many innocent Israelis, men, women, children, elderly, Holocaust survivors they were executing. It was the most disgusting act that we have seen probably in the last 50 years. The most terrifying act that you could ever see. And, you know, when all the news came out on it, it was clear that Hamas was not acting alone. They were actually acting in conjunction with Hezbollah, who started attacking Israel from the north of the Golan Heights in Israel on October 8th, the next day. They were also acting in conjunction and under the authority and control of the regime in Iran, who seeks to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And this was all one confederacy and one accord and one mind between all these guys. So what we've got today is Israel is fighting a 7-front war. They're fighting Hamas in Gaza. They're fighting Hamas acolytes in the West Bank. They're fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. They're fighting the Houthis down in Yemen, which are Iranian-controlled, and they're fighting Iran. And we're presently waiting for the Israelis to strike back against Iran for their rocket or missile attack. They launched like several hundred ballistic missiles at Israel a few weeks ago, and we're presently waiting for Israel to strike back at them, and they've promised that they will do so. And, over the last year, here's what we've seen Israel do. If you flash back to October 7th, there was this day of darkness and horror. And will Israel survive? Will Israel be able to make it out of this? Because they're going to be in for a fight. And fight they have. They've turned the Gaza Strip into a pile of rubble. They're now on the ground in Lebanon. They're on the ground in Syria. They are targeting Hezbollah troops in airstrikes, the likes that haven't been seen in a long time. Very decisive strikes, targeting militants, targeting their bunkers, their tunnel systems, their weapons caches. They're hitting into Iraq. They're hitting Yemen. They've hit Iran. And the biggest thing that I've seen them do that makes me look at this passage with a critical eye and a question in my brain is how they have assassinated their leadership. And I think what they've done, whether it's biblical or not, is nothing short of amazing. Because if you look at the way America has fought its wars over the last 20 years with Iraq and Afghanistan, we never saw, we saw targeted strikes, but not with the precision and the tempo that Israel is able to conduct their strikes against leadership. What do I mean by that? Well, after 9/11, how long did it take us to get bin Laden? It took almost 10 years, or maybe over 10 years, to finally kill Osama bin Laden. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Iraq, the leader of what became known as ISIS. How long did it take us to get him? I was fighting that guy and his wicked forces in 2004, and I don't think we got him till maybe 2006. Couple other guys that you could throw into the mix. We got Baghdadi. He died like a dog, right? Took us a while to get that guy. But Israel, they've done something so amazing, and let me get to that. So you look at these assassinations in Psalm 83. Let's talk about what Israel's done. First, the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, and some of his ministers around him went down in a helicopter crash inside of Iran back in May. Israel never put their thumb on it as far as claiming responsibility, but the whole report about this helicopter incident where these guys died in this crash was there was fog, there was technical complications, and it resulted in the death of the highest of leadership in the nation of Iran. Very interesting. You couple that technical glitch, that mechanical problem that Iran had in that helicopter, and I want you to look at it as kind of a backdrop to the situation where Israel set up a shell company in Budapest, Hungary, and sold Hezbollah thousands of pager devices to communicate with each other. And these pager devices, created by an Israeli company, sold to Hezbollah, were fastened to the hip of every Hezbollah operative that had any reason or need to know any pertinent information as far as go here right now, do this right now. If you are that level or higher, you most likely had a pager on your hip. And a few weeks ago, Israel started texting those pagers, and they went beep, beep, and then they went boom. And everybody holding one of those things in their hand, looking at it, saying, who am I supposed to call? Where am I supposed to go? They lost their face, they lost their eyes, they lost their hands, And if they were too late to pull it off their hip, these dudes lost their balls. They lost their hips. And in one day, I mean, Israel crippled and maimed and killed hundreds and hundreds of Hezbollah fighters. It was absolutely hilarious to watch. The next day, at the funerals of all these guys, their two-way radios start exploding. Their computers start exploding. These guys in Hezbollah were scared to, use the toaster. They don't use electric toothbrushes. They probably don't use toothbrushes at all. But anything electronic, they were looking at with a critical eye and going, I don't think I'm going to do that. I mean, the memes online were absolutely hilarious about this whole thing. These guys had nowhere to turn to. Everything that they held that had any technology in it, they were looking at going, is this thing going to blow my face off right now? Israel's ability to do that, to assassinate all these leaders, all these princes, all these nobles of Hezbollah, is absolutely stunning. So I look at that and I look at the helicopter crash of the president of Iran and I just go, The next thing, Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. This guy's been hiding out in Qatar. He's been hiding out in Iran. And then finally, after, I guess he lasted probably 8 months post October 7th when he launched this attack. His bed blew up in his luxury resort hotel in Tehran, Iran, at the IRGC headquarters. Crazy. I remember Israel targeted the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon in an airstrike as he walked next door from the Iranian embassy inside of Beirut, Lebanon. Crazy. How did they do that? How do they know where he's at? How do they know when he's walking next door? When he's out of the embassy and now not on Iranian soil, and they put a missile through his window. A couple other ones. They've got, and honestly, one of the biggest ones out of all of this is Hassan Nasrallah. Hassan Nasrallah has been a threat to Israel, to America, to U.S. service members, and has a lot of Marine Corps and Army blood on his hands. Nasrallah led Hezbollah for over 30 years. He was this very feared enemy, this guy that if you touched him, if Israel tried to touch him, it would unleash a wave of terror upon Israel, the likes that they'd never seen. And it was only a few days after the beeper incident inside Lebanon and Syria that Nasrallah went to one of his bunkers in Beirut. He was down there with a few other high-level guys, and Israel dropped, I don't know how many thousands of pounds of armament on top of his head and buried him. Completely devastated Hezbollah with this airstrike. The airstrike's beautiful to see if you could find it, maybe on X or something where it's not too censored. But targeting Nasrallah like that, what they also did was Nasrallah had over $1 billion with him in this bunker of cash and gold, and it was all destroyed. I mean, they destroyed him, but they also destroyed over $1 billion, maybe 1.5 billion of Hezbollah wealth. That's your tax dollars, sad to say. But it's good that it was destroyed. Hezbollah appoints another leader, and I don't even know his name. And it's normal that you wouldn't know his name because apparently he wasn't worthy of having a beeper on his hip a week prior, and then now he's the leader of Hezbollah. They killed him, and then they appointed another guy after him, and then Israel killed him too. And then the last one, kind of the cherry on top, is Yahya Sinwar, who was killed yesterday in the Gaza Strip. And Yahya Sinwar was He was seen by Israeli forces that were on the ground. These were grunts. These were tankers on the ground inside the Gaza Strip in Rafah, so which is down in southern Gaza near the Egyptian border. Rafah is where the U.S. administration really didn't want the IDF to be operating. Do some digging on that one. But anyways, Sinwar was spotted, and Sinwar was the military mastermind behind the October 7th attack. And he has been on Israel's list for a long time, ever since they released him from custody. I don't know how many years ago, but they have his DNA. They know everything about him. But this was the mastermind running around in these rat holes in the Gaza Strip over the last year. And after he was spotted by troops, they fired on him. They fired a tank shell at him. And then possibly, I'm seeing reports that a sniper actually got a headshot on him. And I've seen the pictures. I've seen the video. There is a massive hole in the top and side of his head. And he went out like a dog, just like the way he should have. But what's interesting to me, to dial it all back to Psalm 83 and the ask that I have in the beginning of this video is like, is Israel fighting this war now? And what do you have? What do you have that is similar? What do you have? What's going on now that looks like this? What looks like this is this conspiracy of nations, of peoples, of militant terrorist groups to come against Israel, to cut them off from being a nation forever. That's why this whole thing, launched on October 7th, was called the Al-Aqsa Flood. The Al-Aqsa Flood was targeting the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Their whole goal and desire, regardless of how stupid it sounds, was to overrun all of Israel and take the Temple Mount. That's what Hamas's goal was. Up north in Lebanon, the goal of these guys that would eventually infiltrate Israel was to go all the way to Jerusalem because they want the Temple Mount. So their goal, the goal of the enemy of Israel, is the goal of the enemies in Psalm 83. That we can definitively say, for sure. They do look a lot like them as far as the neighboring countries around Israel in this passage and who we see fighting today. That is quite similar. And then quite similar to this passage, and it's the one that I've been mulling over in my head, is you look at the targeted assassinations in this passage, and you look at how Israel has targeted the leadership of their enemy from Iran, from Gaza, from Lebanon, into Damascus, Syria, into places of Iraq. And we're about to probably see some targeted assassinations in Iran. We will see what happens next. But one thing interesting about all of this, okay? And so I'm just asking the question. Again, please don't take me out of context. This is a historic war. Israel has not fought a war like this with this decisiveness. Possibly since the days of King David. I could be wrong on that. You can fact check me on that. But I said possibly. This is such a decisive war. And one thing that has stood out to me watching this whole thing go down, at the outset of this war, Benjamin Netanyahu warned his people that this is going to be a long war. They're going to change everything on the ground. They're going to change the complete atmosphere surrounding their nation, and that they will be a people living in peace and security. And he actually said in the statement that the nation of Israel will realize the prophecies of Isaiah at the end of this war, where Israel is into its glory. That's the mindset of the Prime Minister of Israel. That's the mindset of his cabinet. That's very interesting that he would say such a thing. So with all that being said, we have yet to see what's going to happen. Netanyahu has kind of telegraphed some of his intent with Iran and said he is putting out there to the people of Iran that the game is going to change in that country too, and that all options are on the table. And I would not be surprised if we wake up one morning and we see that top leadership in Iran is no more. And I'm talking about the Ayatollah himself. I think that it's possible that Israel targets him. And again, the president, and just all the top brass, all of the religious leadership. I think that it's possible, regardless of whether what we see now has anything to do with Psalm 83. We are living in amazing times, and we are watching a major, amazing military campaign take place by the nation of Israel, a country that is no bigger than the state of New Jersey. This is nothing short of amazing. And I think that we can definitively say that God is on Israel's side, and God is helping Israel fight their battles. That is plain and clear to me, because God operates on the battlefields that you and I find ourselves on. Hey, if you got anything out of this video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this out to somebody that needs to hear it. See you next time.